You're trespassing on private community grounds. Step away from the gate, or I'm pressing charges. That was the welcome home greeting I received. Not a hug, not a handshake, but a threat from a woman standing on the very soil my family has bled into since 1952. I had just driven 14 hours straight, the dust of an 18-month deployment still clinging to my boots, my duffel bag thrown haphazardly in the bed of my pickup truck, and there I was, staring at the entrance of Thorn Valley Homestead, the 200-acre sanctuary that has been the beating heart of my lineage for 3 generations, only to find the way barred by a pristine, pearl-white Lexus and a woman who looked like she had just stepped out of a catalog for aggressive suburbanites. She was already on the phone with dispatch, her voice shrill and performing for an audience of none, shouting, "Officer, there is a vagrant refusing to vacate our subdivision entrance," while sirens began to wail in the distance, echoing off the canyon walls that used to amplify only the lowing of cattle and the rustle of wind through the oaks. I walked toward her, slowly, deliberately, clutching the original deed my grandfather, Silas Thorne, had filed with the county clerk decades before her manicured subdivision was even a glint in a developer's greedy eye. And she just smiled, that tight, confident, predator's smile, absolutely certain that I was about to be handcuffed and hauled away, completely unaware that her phone call was the first domino in a chain reaction that would eventually obliterate everything she had built. Let me rewind. Let me take you back to the calm before the storm so you can understand the gravity of what was being stolen. Thorn Valley isn't just dirt and grass. It's a legacy carved out of the rugged Montana foothills by Silas, a man who homesteaded this land with nothing but a mule, a handshake deal, and a spine made of iron, cultivating 200 acres of rolling pastures, original growth timber, and a creek that runs so clear you can count the pebbles at the bottom from 10 feet up. I am the 3rd generation to steward this land, trained by the Army Corps of Engineers in infrastructure, water rights, and land surveying, skills the military drilled into me until they were instinct, skills that teach you precision, documentation, and the tactical necessity of thinking 3 moves ahead of your enemy, which, as it turned out, was about to become the most valuable weapon in my arsenal. The ranch was the community's anchor. We ran cattle, we hosted the county fair every July, and my workshop was basically a public utility where I'd fixed everything from Mrs. Alvarez's tractor to the volunteer fire department's pump engine, usually for the price of a handshake or a warm casserole. But 3 years ago, the atmosphere shifted. The air grew heavy with the scent of fresh asphalt and entitlement when Richard Sterling's development company broke ground on Willow Creek Heights, a luxury subdivision that sprung up right against our fence line like a fungus, bringing with it massive McMansions, chemically green lawns, and an HOA rulebook thick enough to stop a bullet. Brenda Sterling, Richard's wife, appointed herself HOA president before the drywall was even up in the model home. A 45-year-old former pharmaceutical rep who drove that white Lexus like a tank and wielded words like community aesthetics and property values as if they were holy scripture. The friction started subtly, like sand and gears, with Brenda driving slowly past our perimeter fence, snapping photos, then escalating to anonymous complaints to the county about unsightly agricultural byproducts, which was just her fancy way of saying she hated the smell of honest work, the mix of fresh hay and leather clashing with the sterile, chemical scent of her new construction. When I finally got back from overseas, expecting the peace of the valley, I found my front door plastered with HOA violation notices, a tapestry of neon orange paper demanding $500 a day in fines for unauthorized livestock in a residential zone. Referring to my cattle, specifically Barnaby, my prize bull, and his herd, who were apparently violating Brenda's delicate sensibilities just by existing. Mrs. Alvarez, my nearest neighbor and the sweet grandmotherly figure of the valley, filled me an over-strong black coffee, her hands shaking slightly as she told me. That woman has been here 3 times, Joe, measuring the setbacks, photographing the creek, asking questions about your water rights. And when I checked the rough wooden gate post where Silas had carved Thorn 1952, I saw fresh gouges, scratches where someone had tried to sand away history. But Brenda's opening gambit was diabolically brilliant. She had hired a surveyor to redefine the boundary lines and filed a complaint claiming our ranch access road, the very road my grandfather cut by hand, fell under the jurisdiction of Willow Creek Heights. 2 days after my return, Brenda rolled up with a slick lawyer in a BMW, stepping out onto the gravel like she was landing on the moon, clipboard in hand, demanding we liquidate all livestock within 48 hours or face catastrophic legal consequences. I stood there, still wearing my work jeans, leaning against the fence, looking at this woman in her power suit telling me to destroy a herd that had grazed these hills since the Eisenhower administration. And right on cue, Barnaby lumbered over, let out a snort that shook the ground, and stared at her Lexus with deep, bovine judgment. "Ma'am," I said, keeping my voice dangerously low. "This ranch operates under an agricultural exemption granted in 1952. We are grandfathered in. Your rules stop at that fence line." But Brenda's smile just sharpened into a blade. "Not according to our community council," she replied, her voice dripping with condescension. "This entire valley is now zoned residential, and your little hobby farm is dragging down the equity of legitimate homeowners." Hobby farm. She called 70 years of blood, sweat, and survival a hobby farm. And as they drove away, tires spitting gravel at my feet, I realized this wasn't a dispute. This was an invasion, and Brenda Sterling had just declared war on the wrong soldier. She didn't waste a second, escalating immediately by filing formal complaints with the county claiming our ranch was a biohazard, hiring a surveyor in pressed khakis who wouldn't know a property pin from a tent stake to redraw the maps, and spreading poison at the country club that our beef was tainted, unaware that half the board members bought their steaks directly from my freezer. She sent certified letters to every neighbor urging them to file noise complaints against the cattle, but she underestimated the deep roots of rural loyalty, because Mrs. Alvarez brought me the letter, laughing, saying, "This woman has more nerve than a bad tooth." The Army taught me that when you are under fire, you don't just return fire blindly, you gather intelligence. So I spent 3 days in the dusty basement of the county courthouse, digging through records like I was hunting for IEDs, and what I found was absolute gold. Willow Creek Heights was built using overlay zoning, a fancy legal term meaning the county allowed the subdivision to exist around us, acknowledging that the original properties retained all their pre-existing rights, meaning my ranch was an island of sovereignty in her sea of HOA rules. But the real bombshell was in the 2019 planning minutes, where Richard Sterling himself argued that keeping the ranch would add rustic charm and authentic character, literally using my family's legacy as a marketing prop to sell houses to the very people now trying to destroy us. I called Arthur Vance, our family attorney, a man who has been burying bodies, legally speaking, since before Brenda was born, and when I slapped the documents on his mahogany desk, he grinned like a wolf. "Son," he said, "we have them dead to rights. But let's do this by the book." So we ordered a forensic survey using the original 1952 markers Iron Pin Silas had driven into the bedrock himself, and the results were poetic justice. Not only was our exemption rock solid, but Brenda's precious community entrance, with its faux stone pillars and pretentious gold leaf sign, was built 15 feet over the property line, my property line, meaning her monument to exclusivity was technically trespassing on the very hobby farm she despised. When I served the trespass notice on a Tuesday, I expected a retreat, but Brenda was incapable of reverse gear. By Thursday, she returned with a county inspector, her face twisted in a triumphant sneer, demanding an immediate cattle inspection, convinced she was about to spring a trap. "Ma'am," the inspector sighed, looking at her like she was a slow child. "This ranch predates the zoning office. Everything here is code compliant." And watching Brenda's face cycle through 6 shades of purple was satisfying. But when she hissed, "I don't care about dusty papers. I won't have this neighborhood turned into a backwoods cattle lot. I'll make his life miserable until he breaks." The inspector actually stepped back and noted the threat in his official log: harassment of a protected agricultural operation is a serious offense in this state. Brenda, realizing she was losing the ground war, decided to attack the water. 2 weeks later, the Willow Creek Board voted to improve community drainage by redirecting the natural flow of our creek, claiming my ranch runoff was a mosquito hazard, a clever lie wrapped in bureaucratic language. She hired contractors to dig a diversion channel on HOA land, and the sound of heavy diesel engines tearing into the earth at dawn was the sound of my patience snapping, because that creek is the lifeblood of the valley, fed by springs my father mapped, and protected by riparian rights that go back to the original homestead deed. I didn't scream, I didn't fight the workers, I just used my core training to map the watershed, taking samples upstream and downstream, proving that the water leaving my ranch was actually cleaner than the water entering it, thanks to the natural filtration of our pastures, while the subdivision's runoff was a toxic cocktail of lawn fertilizer and road oil. I called the state water board, an agency that does not play games, and when I explained an HOA was diverting a natural waterway without a federal permit, their enforcement division descended on Willow Creek like the wrath of God. The state inspector, a no-nonsense veteran of environmental law, looked at Brenda's muddy trench and then at my cattle drinking peacefully under the ancient oaks, and said, "You folks are doing everything right. This ranch is a model of sustainability," before slapping the HOA with a cease and desist order and fines of $10,000 per day until the creek was restored. The look on Brenda's face when she realized her plan had backfired so hard the state was now recommending the subdivision adopt my conservation practices was worth every second of stress. But she wasn't done. She was just getting desperate. Her next assault came through the city code enforcement office, weaponizing a man named Officer Higgins, a guy who carried his clipboard like a shield and measured my fence height with the zeal of a religious fanatic, citing me for unsafe barn structures and improper vehicle storage. It was a coordinated attack, piling up citations to bleed me dry, but Higgins made a fatal error when he demanded an engineering certification for my barn roof, claiming it wasn't up to residential code, unaware that agricultural structures are exempt, and even more unaware that I am a licensed professional engineer. I called in a favor from my buddy Marcus, a structural engineer with federal credentials who was visiting on leave, and he stood in front of my barn, laughed, and told Higgins, "This building is over-engineered by 200%. It could survive a mortar strike." And his federal certification trumped Higgins' municipal authority instantly. While Brenda was busy trying to strangle us with red tape, she was also poisoning the community, spreading rumors that I was a dangerous individual with military weapons training and pressuring the local feed store to boycott us. But she didn't understand that out here, loyalty is currency. The feed store owner, a Vietnam vet named Charlie Alvarez, Mrs. Alvarez's husband, posted Brenda's demand letter on the bulletin board under a sign that read "Local Jokers," and told her exactly where she could shove her lawn fertilizer orders. But despite these victories, I knew she would keep coming until I found the kill switch, so I went back to the archives, digging deeper into the property history than anyone had in decades, driving all the way to the state capitol to pull the original land grants. That's when I found it, the smoking gun that changed everything. A clerical error from 1987 buried in a mislabeled box of microfiche. The county had sold the land for Willow Creek Heights to Richard's company using a quit-claim deed, which transfers only the ownership the seller has, but the survey maps revealed that 25 acres of the development, including the community center, the pool, and the grand entrance, had never been legally transferred from the Thorne family to the county in the first place. I sat in that silent reading room, the smell of old paper filling my lungs, my heart hammering against my ribs as the realization washed over me. Brenda's HOA had built $800,000 worth of infrastructure on land that I still owned. They were not just harassing me, they were squatting on my property. Arthur Vance literally jumped out of his chair when he saw the proofs, pacing his office like a shark smelling blood, saying, "They are living on stolen land. Caleb, their title is defective, their insurance is void, and every fine they've levied against you is illegal because they have no standing." We had the nuclear codes, but instead of pushing the button immediately, I decided to give Brenda the rope to hang herself. We filed a quiet title action to force a public hearing, a stage where every dirty trick would be exposed under oath. I designed temporary, removable barriers for the disputed entrance, my entrance, and set them up overnight with signs reading, "Disputed property, legal resolution pending," knowing exactly what she would do. Brenda reacted like a cornered animal, calling the police, threatening lawsuits, and screaming about an illegal blockade, which was exactly what I wanted because it created a police record of the dispute. Mrs. Alvarez turned her kitchen into a command center, feeding me intel that the HOA board was panicking, fearing personal liability for Brenda's vendetta, and I realized that if I played this right, I wouldn't just win the legal battle, I would dismantle her entire kingdom. With the county hearing looming like an execution date, Brenda went scorched earth, abandoning all pretense of civility and launching a social media blitz painting me as an unhinged militant threatening the safety of children. She manipulated images of my cattle to look starving, created fake profiles to harass me, and finally, she played her dirtiest card yet, a restraining order based on pure fiction, claiming I had stalked her by driving on the public road past the HOA entrance, my only route to town. The judge granted a temporary order, legally prohibiting me from approaching HOA property for 72 hours, which effectively trapped me on my ranch just as I needed to move the herd for pasture rotation. It was a brilliant, evil trap. If I moved the cattle past the disputed entrance, I'd be arrested for violating the order, missing the hearing, and losing by default. But Brenda forgot that on the battlefield, terrain dictates tactics. I hired a professional cattle team led by Jake, a retired Marine who understood precision, and we moved the herd using a GPS-verified route that stayed exactly 1 foot outside the restricted zone, with county animal control present to document everything. Brenda, unable to resist the spectacle, drove her Lexus right up to the boundary line during the drive, blocking the path and screaming at Jake to stop. And when the police arrived, Officer Bradley, a man who grew up hunting on my land, he didn't arrest me. Instead, he looked at the screaming woman, the calm cattle, and the GPS markers, and said, "Ma'am, you are the one creating a disturbance. These men are conducting a legal operation." And Brenda's on-camera meltdown, accusing the police of a conspiracy, was the final piece of evidence we needed. The next morning, the county courthouse was packed, standing room only, filled with reporters, nervous HOA members, and supporters of the ranch. Brenda arrived looking like a queen in exile, flanked by her lawyer and a terrified Richard, but when the hearing started, the atmosphere shifted instantly. Arthur Vance didn't just present a case. He performed an autopsy on their fraud, displaying the 1952 deed, the tax records proving my family had paid on the disputed 25 acres every year, and the defective 1987 transfer. When the commissioner asked, "Are you claiming the HOA is squatting?" Arthur replied, "I'm claiming they are trespassing on a massive scale while harassing the legal owner." And the room went deathly silent. Brenda, unable to contain her rage as her world crumbled, interrupted the proceedings, standing up and shouting, "This is a sham. We represent progress, not some dusty museum piece of a ranch." It was the moment that sealed her fate. I stood up, feeling the weight of Silas and my father behind me, and said quietly to the commissioners, "My family has been good neighbors for 70 years, but we will not be bullied off our land by people who build illegally. The choice is simple, a reasonable settlement that protects everyone, or I enforce my property rights and you remove every structure from my soil." The gavel came down like a thunderclap. The county ruled that Thorn Valley Homestead held clear title to the 25 acres, voiding all HOA liens against me and ordering the association to dissolve and reform within 90 days. Brenda was removed from the chamber screaming about federal conspiracies, while the remaining board members practically tripped over themselves to apologize and negotiate a lease. 6 months later, the valley is peaceful again. Brenda and Richard divorced and left town in disgrace. He's facing fraud charges, and she's working retail 2 counties over, her reign of terror a fading memory. The new community association pays a fair lease for the land. Barnaby is a local celebrity who poses for selfies with the neighborhood kids, and I married Dr. Elena Ross, the vet who stood by me when the world seemed against us. We won, not just the land, but the respect of the community, turning enemies into neighbors. But as I watched the sun set over the creek, now protected by a permanent conservation easement, I have to ask, why does it take a war to get people to treat each other with basic decency? Justice was served, but at what cost to the soul of a community? What would you have done if they tried to steal your grandfather's legacy? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories where the little guy fights back and wins.